All right. Hello to our Theater Philadelphia community. We are so excited to be back for our seventh annual Philly Theater Week, highlighting, celebrating, and helping produce all of these, like over 30 different productions across the greater Philadelphia community. And today I have the great honor to be sitting down with the InterAct community, InterAct Theater. Seth Rosen and Caitlin Zion are on here with me. I'm excited for them both to be here and for us to have a little conversation about the upcoming production of The Last Yiddish Speaker. I would want to give time for Seth and for Caitlin. Can you introduce yourselves with your pronouns, but also where you find yourself today in this kind of work of theater in Philly?
Caitlin, go ahead.
All right. Hi. I'm Caitlin. I use they and she pronouns. I am very honored to be playing Sarah in The Last Yiddish Speaker, which is a brand new play that InterAct is producing, being directed by Seth. And I am a recent graduate from the University of the Arts. So this is one of my first real kind of large, like full equity theatrical experience. It's been very exciting, it's been just so fantastic. I've learned so much and I'm excited to learn even more. And I'm really honored to have this be kind of the start of my career and my time in Theater Philadelphia. Yeah.
I'm Seth Rosen, producing artistic director of InterAct Theater Company. I go by he, him, and very happy to be here.
Yeah. And if you don't know me by now, my name is Sabria Shipley. I'm the executive director of Theater Philadelphia. And also so very happy to be here and to get down to this discussion. I'm very excited. My first question always is, for any artist I'm like sitting down and talking with, what has the journey to this story been like for you? Coming, whether it's the audition process, whether it is for Seth choosing this production and being like, okay, I want to work on this. What has that journey been for you as an individual artist, and what is that calling to it?
Well, I'll jump in since the play came to me before it came to Caitlin. So about a year ago, a colleague of mine who is actually the executive director of National New Play Network, a national organization that InterAct helped to found around new plays. She texted me and said, Seth, I was just at a reading of this play that I think you really should look at for InterAct. And she's a close colleague who really gets us. So I immediately said, yeah, please send it to me. And she sent the play along and I read it and I found it incredibly funny, moving, very human, and ultimately really important and timely. And so I reached out to the playwright who I hadn't worked with before, but I knew of, and found out that the play was, brand new and is still in progress, and that there wasn't anyone else committed to producing it yet. So we got on board very quickly and helped to get 2 other theaters on board to produce it. So it's a National New Play Network rolling world premiere, which means that there will be 3 guaranteed productions for this play. Ours is the first this coming month, and the other 2 are happening in October, November. And after I read the play, I started to put our team together, and so happened that Caitlin was going to be coming up with us to Maine for a play development retreat on another play. And I said, hey, I think you might like this play. I just sent it to her to take a look at. And that's how she sort of got word of it. And I'll let her take it from there.
Yeah. So yeah, it was that summer. Seth sent me the play and I read it and immediately fell in love with the play and with the character specifically. And I was like, oh, I need this. And excuse me. And then yeah, and so then after that summer, maybe in around early fall was when the auditions happened. And it was a pretty quick standard audition process. um I came in with a monologue and then did the callback. And then I found out that day that I got it and I was over the moon excited.
It so happens that the person who plays Caitlin's character, Sarah, Sarah's boyfriend in the play, was also up in Maine with us, and I had precast him. He's a local graduate of Temple's grad program. And then I also reached out to my dear friend and colleague Dan Hodge, who has had spent a couple decades of work in Philadelphia, but he's now living in Croatia. And I got him in for a third role. And then I reached out to a woman who had written a play we did last season called The Last Parade, named Stephanie Satie. And she's in LA. And I thought of her immediately when I read the play. And I said, hey, can you do this role, this 1,000-year-old Yiddish speaking woman? And she had the same reaction that Caitlin had. She read it, loved it, said, I'm out. So she's in from LA. We have someone from LA, from Croatia, and 2 from Philly.
Yeah, listen.
The worldly.
It took a lot to pull together our first Zoom reading, because we had to account for Croatia time zone and LA time zone. That was a little nutty.
When I tell you, I feel like that's the whole pandemic. That's everyone's kind of schedule of like trying to figure out like, hey, what's gonna work out? Because people are everywhere. You know what I'm saying?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. So that's exciting to have, to bring all the people together. What I love about the notion of the last year's speaker is this notion of the Yiddish language, right? And history. And I think when I think about for myself with my African ancestry, I look to a lot of times, I love when plays feature Yoruba or certain different languages that are still practiced today, and highlight sort of a heritage and a culture that needs to be celebrated as well. It goes into ethnography, it goes into like delving into how do we keep alive these things are essential to our faith, our living, our being, our community. What are some things that stick out to you from the last Yiddish speaker that you're like, these themes speak to me as to why this production now?
Well, certainly you hit on something that's really critical, which is the preservation of language and as a vehicle for culture. Language is perhaps one of the keys, if not the key, to the preservation of culture. And Yiddish is a language that could disappear because the number of people who speak it is very few, and the people who did speak it are dying out, right? And it's a very, very expressive language that carries with it a lot of culture. And the feeling, I think, among those who know the language or know of the language is that when it dies, there will be something lost beyond the language. And the play definitely captures that. It's a great play for an ethnographer because Yiddish is a subset of Jewish culture that came out of Middle Europe in the last 1,000 years. And so that it's something most of the Jews who spoke it have moved to other places, and over time they've assimilated and adopted, of course, the language of their new country. And so the language has largely died, though many words that are Yiddish have made it into our vernacular. A lot of people say oi, and things like schmuck, right? People say that, and things like that. Those are Yiddish words, and so there's some fun that will last probably. But that was one of the things that stuck out to me. And the other thing that really stuck out to me is the play imagines a near future, several years from now, in which the United States is now under a white supremacist rule after a successful January 6th insurrection. And so it's imagining a time when this issue of certain cultures and certain languages and certain kinds of people either dying out or being expelled or being persecuted to a point where we are at a tipping point, at least in this country. And so I found that very incredibly compelling. And that was a year ago when I read it. Since then, a couple things have happened in the world that have made it even more, I would say, urgent as opposed to just timely. One is that the war between Israel and Hamas has grabbed our attention and has pushed people into their corners of political polarization, which we're already in. And it has also led to a rise of anti-Semitism, as I'm sure you're aware, in this country. And the other thing is that the prospect of American democracy actually being at risk is much closer now than it was a year ago. I think that we weren't fully thinking about it then, but now it feels like we really, really are. And November's election has a huge amount at stake in that regard. So the play has become much more urgent than when I first read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with all of that, Seth. I think another thing that's really stuck out to me in the play is how funny it is and how much joy there is in it, even though it's in this really dark and depressing time. I feel like a lot of times, specifically with plays dealing with this subject, and a lot of times with like Jewish culture and work and plays in general, a lot of times I feel like it can focus on very negative and depressing aspects, which is of course part of our history and part of what has happened. um, but there is a lot of joy in it too. And even though there are still the sad parts, I feel like this culture and this religion of, has really gone through the test of time over and over and over again. And I feel like that's something that's really highlighted in this play very beautifully. um yeah, and also just the human connections in it are really beautiful between all four of the characters. It's such a small show, and all four characters are so real and flawed, and there's not I, like I feel like when watching the play and when reading the play, you don't feel like that classic, like, oh, that's the enemy, that's the good person. They're all complex and flawed characters, which makes it real. And characters that grow up in different places and hear different things, and that are affected by different forms of media and different forms of news, and how that can how that can influence you as a person. If you're hearing one thing from a very young age, how is that going to influence your everything, how you see the world? um and I feel like that's highlighted really, really beautifully in this show.
And at a certain level, it's just it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, it's
Mm-hmm.
a father, daughter, and then into that scenario comes this 1,000-year-old Yiddish speaking woman who sort of is the
Yeah.
embodiment of the Jewish diaspora and the struggle to survive for all those years. And she becomes sort of a maternal figure to the
Yeah.
father and the daughter. And so a family grows, and we just see in some ways a family trying to persevere and find its roots in the middle of a very dire circumstance in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what I hear, just going back to what Caitlin was saying also about the notion of intersectional kind of ways in which we experience human life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think of the various genocides that have happened throughout our history, from various cultures, I think what I hold on to in seeing different types of theater that partake on a certain demographics vision or view of
Mm-hmm.
their heritage and their language, it also drives me to really dig deep into the notion of how the way in which multiple diasporas and even ones that are
Mm-hmm.
happening today strip us of languages, of
Yeah.
history, of core,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you say like the timely piece of the last year's speaker, what I hear is also this notion of how this story inspires also the notion of how do we hold on to Yoruba, how do we hold on to Islam, how do we hold on to these different practices that have been enriching many people's
Mm-hmm.
lives and their
Yeah.
human nature to each other.
Right.
And how do we have these open conversations about it to say, like what Caitlin, going back to what Caitlin's saying about how sometimes these things are indoctrined in us and how we view
Right.
other people and life and how we, influence. And what I love also is that having the conversation around, while you may see it as a war, I see it as a genocide. While you may see it as a stripping of language, I see it as an evolution of people growing, right? But also, but having that core conversation to say, okay, we see these, right? And let's have a whole dive into it, because Theater Philadelphia is not just made up of a secular notion of we decide this is the right way, right? But we all definitely hold true to our beliefs, right? And at the core, we all are just searching for the language that has been stripped away from us.
Yeah.
And that's, this is kind of for someone who, when I was in high school, did a program with Congressman Elijah Cummings, the late Congressman Elijah Cummings,
Mhm.
and I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, just around the corner from Park Heights. And if you go to Baltimore, you know Park Heights has a very heavy Jewish community, and Elijah Cummings started this kind of notion of bringing together the Jewish community and the Black community in Park Heights. And the program has been going for about 25 years now, where they send a group of Black and Brown students from the Park Heights area or the district that Elijah Cummings ran to Israel for a month and a half. When they're 17, we do like a 2-year internship at with Congress and things like that in the Black Caucus. And one of the things that even living in Israel, this conversation about this ongoing battle and this war and this diaspora and the notion of like strict language and memory and harmful things came up and was very open and discussed, and kind of shaped my view on how I approach these conversations about like these are important stories to tell, and they also streamline more than we think with what's going on in multiple different communities. Right.
No question, and I think you hit on something that's really, really at the heart of this play, which is America is this place that has been built entirely, with the exception of Native Americans. Everyone who's here is descended from a refugee, an immigrant, a slave, or what's the other? There's a fourth one. But anyway, almost nobody who's here was here originally, and they came here some by choice, some not by choice, right? Fleeing places and different things. And this play imagines the two Jewish, the father-daughter, Paul and Sarah, who are in this play. These are assimilated, culturally Jewish, but they're not religious, and they are progressive. They are on the side they are not religious, and they're also not particularly involved with Israel at all, which is very typical of most Jews in America, I would say. I'm certainly like that. I think, Caitlin, you as well. And so there's a tendency for people, for instance, to think of Jews as in a monolith. As I'm sure, Sabria, you're aware that people think of Blacks sometimes in the monolith, right? and yet, if you look around the world at all the places where Black people are, just like as you look around the world where all the places where Jewish folks are, they all came from somewhere originally, but we're all over, and then we become a whole lot of different things. And we have contributed to those cultures. We've also had our difficulties in those cultures. Jews have been chased out of many places and expelled or exterminated from many places, and yet we have found culture and made culture in different places, and also assimilated in ways that sometimes we've lost something. And that's really at the heart of what this play is about.
I love it. I think that is what I love about having podcasts like this, because it's an opportunity to talk more and to be like, nah, this is why we did this is it. This delves deeper into it, you know? Right. Because I think a lot of times, because we're so combined with news and things and talk, we don't necessarily dig down deep to kind of dig into these productions that are happening around us and to say, ooh, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's this going on. And, you know, to me, I was excited to be last year's speaker. I was like, oh shoot. I was like, I remember, you know, learning about Yiddish and because I just love language, being like, oh, I want to hear more about what is that tie and connection, right? But that's also come my ethnography background, because I'm like, I'll sit and I'll learn about New culture, and you know, and not to say in judgment, but to be like, oh, okay, that's how you see that, right? Because as you talked about, like with Blackness, we talk about Blackness in a worldwide spectrum, Pan-African, you know what I'm saying, and that notion of, but we have different ways in which we like do Blackness and how we move forward with it. That's like something you have pushback, and people are like, this is not a depiction of Blackness. You're like, but it is, because
it is for someone,
like somebody, you know. And I think that is something that needs to be in discussion about a lot of things. I think it's always layered. You know, there's a point in time where Jewish and Black people align together, right? In wanting to make, you know, a way for us to kind of like survive the systems that were being set up against us, right? And then there's also times we talk about where, I know in that program we sat down with a lot of Jewish teens and we had the conversation about the ways in which Black people have been impressed by Jewish people in capitalistic kind of systems, right? And then vice versa, the notion of, you know, judgments and stereotypes and what does that look like, you know? But what I see and what I love hearing is because we have this disagreement, this doesn't mean we stop telling the stories.
Yeah.
Right? And stop the conversation. And that's
No.
why I love, listen.
Good. Yeah. I mean, that's why we do everything we do at InterAct. It's to provoke a conversation, because if the most that happens after a show is people walk out and are thinking about what they're going to be eating next, we have not done our job at InterAct. So we want the conversation, we welcome it, and we want that. We expect it to be not necessarily contentious, but we expect there to be different points of view on everything that we present. I'm expecting, for instance, with this show, that just within alone the Jewish community here that shows up for it, which we think will be pretty robust, that we're going to get very different views on the spectrum of that. And then when you add in everybody else who either knows something or doesn't know something about Jewish history or about Yiddish or about what they think about the future or what they think about what's going on in Israel right now, there's going to be a lot of conversation, because it's so timely that everyone's going to have, as you say, Sabria, everyone's going to be in their beliefs. And the question is, how can we have a conversation around that? Yeah. And that's what we're all about. So we're excited about it.
Yeah. And I'm very excited about that. I love the notion of like, keep talking more about InterAct's mission too, because I think I've enjoyed all the productions I've went to at InterAct very, very much. I enjoy kind of, you know, what we want, and the InterAct support of Theater Philadelphia has been amazing throughout different seasons of Theater Philadelphia's like life and transitions. But I'd love to hear more about, you know, where the InterAct, like where does that come into play? And how do you plan on like wanting to bring even more audiences to InterAct, right, in very intersections?
Right. So our mission is to do new and contemporary plays that explore the social, political, and cultural issues of our time. So everything is very relevant. Everything is not. Some people think we take stuff from the headlines, but it's actually the opposite. We actually pick plays before the headlines happen, and then often our plays end up feeling like they're very, very prescient, but they're not actually. We picked them before the headlines came. So. But the idea is to engage our community, as broad a community as possible, in an ongoing conversation about the world we live in and that we are both responding to and influencing. And so what we try to do is use theater as a tool to activate our critical thinking, to think more broadly, more deeply, more critically about everything that's going on in the world. Some people, I think, have a notion that we are very like a left-wing or activist type of theater, and I don't see us. I've never wanted us to be that. I'm not interested in telling our audiences that racism is bad. Everyone who works for InterAct, everyone who is an artist at InterAct, everyone who comes to our shows already feels that way. So we're more interested in doing a play that might show a circumstance that asks you to look at something that isn't so simple, that is more complicated, that is more provocative, that is not as simple to compartmentalize in a way that makes us feel good. We're trying to challenge our audience to think about the world. And in terms of bringing new audiences in, we try to do that by doing plays about every aspect of humanity. So over the course of our almost 36 years now, we've done plays that are from every part of the globe and almost every part of our national community and our local community. We are diversity matters in every way, not just diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, but diversity in point of view. So we've had plays that are articulated very conservative points of view. We've had plays that articulate liberal points of view in conflict with each other, where our own audience is asked to consider the person next to them who believes something different. How do we talk to that? How do we talk about that to move forward? That's at the very heart of everything that we do. And this is just one more play in that long line.
Yeah.
I'm also very excited to have I'm a lot of my friends are like college age, younger, and I think that this play in particular is going to be like really important to have some of my friends and some people that I just know coming in to see it, because just in general I feel like you know, most of my friends are artists. I think that theater is something that is so important for not just artists, but everybody to experience, especially new work, because it, you know, so it reflects what's happening in the world and what's happening around us right now. Um, and so and I feel like, you know, it's really important, especially for younger people, to conserve that and to be the next torch and to like keep on keeping theater alive and keep on creating new work. And I think that starts with seeing it and getting inspired from it.
Yeah. And I love that, Caitlin. Can you, one, Seth, thank you for like going deeply into this notion of pushing past what we think. You know, we've decided we're anti-racist, we decided we're anti-colonization, or we're anti this, right? But pushing past that, have we delved into sort through what that means, right?
Mhm.
What I used to have a teacher talk about walking contradictions, how a lot of us are walking contradictions. And how the work comes in creating work and being a part of work that explores those contradictions within you and sorts them even more, right? And so being able to see theater that is like, all right, this is going to test you, whether or not you totally are like, nope, or are you a little bit intrigued by this point of view that you're seeing on stage, and how does that come up within you as the artist you are? And I love that. Like, that to me is something that is that radical theater we look to have. And radical being, and I think a lot of people use radical in a very buzzword way.
Yeah.
And I think radical becomes in the everyday things that we choose to do to change the system that we're in, or to change how we're presenting art, right? So I think a lot of people would love to know more. This is why we have these talks, so that people be like, oh, this is why they're doing this, or this is why we're choosing this, or this is why this is happening, because this is behind message. But we, you know, we all trying to run businesses, so like the conversations rarely happen about it, but it's beautiful when it does, right? And I want to, you know, Caitlin, I want to talk more about, like, I'm talking to a lot of different college age students from Temple to Villanova, who are graduating. And the goal of Theater Philadelphia in the future is to not only support the current actors and artists, but to encourage your generation of young artists to stick around with us for a little bit. Stay in Philly for, you know, at least 2 years. Give us a while, you know, because we understand that, you know, we want Philly to be that scene. You know what I'm saying? That theater scene where everybody like, we got the best. What you mean, New York? We got our peoples. But you know, that stick around. Can you talk about a vision that you might have for the way in which your generation of coming out of school would love, or just the early, you know, 20s would love to see Theater Philadelphia and Philly theater in general support or encourage y'all more?
Well, I totally agree. I feel like a lot of people my age are slowly starting to turn against New York in their own way. Which is neither here nor there. Nothing against New York. Doesn't say anything bad. But I feel like something that's really important about Theater Philadelphia is, one, to do the new work. I think that it's important to do things that push on social boundaries and that, you know, actively are asking questions. I think that's a really great way to get people around my age in and interested in theater, doing new stuff, trying new things, experimenting. And I think that's something that's really great about Philly theater, is that there is that space for that, and just promoting that more and putting that more into like young spaces, putting that on Instagram. I don't know, putting it out and about, and you know, because media attention is the best way to get people's attention, especially younger people. Another thing is, I think that having either a lot of people my age are like, oh, I would love to see theater, but it's expensive. I don't have the time, blah, 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 whatever reason it might be, which I totally sympathize with and, you know, agree with at some point. I think luckily, a lot of theater in Philly is on the cheaper side, which is wonderful. But I think a wonderful way to engage is having, either, and not every theater can do this, of course, but having discounted nights or having college student nights where there's like talkbacks, just trying to find a way to involve people and involve not just people my age, but people that typically wouldn't see theater for whatever reason. I think having more affordable tickets in theater, because it can be an elitist or seem to be an elitist art form in a lot of ways, and I think that sometimes it can exclude different groups of people for costly reasons. Why, like, if you got to eat or if you got to see theater, you're going to eat. Which is a sad reality for a lot of people. But I think that a lot of Philly theaters and theater in general are trying to do cheaper, discounted, different price range. I know InterAct does student tickets, industry tickets, which is wonderful. And I think just doing more of that, I think, is a great way. And to, involve the community more, go to colleges. I think that, like, I remember when I was in New York, like, there would be like people from the different theaters coming in, having talks, whatever show is happening. I think it's important for professors also to like talk about the plays that are happening. I feel like that was something that, I went to college at a weird time during the pandemic, so there wasn't a lot of shows going on, but my like freshman year when I was on campus, I was really important to have my professors be like, these are the theaters in Philly. These are the shows that are happening. We're going to talk about them. We might read some of them, like, and then as a group, we're going to, like, as a class, we're going to go and see it. And then maybe an actor will come in, or maybe the artistic director will come in, or somebody, if they have the time to, talk to the class, have a discussion. I think that's a really great way to bring everybody in.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in getting younger audiences into, and we're doing it partly through a Young Friends of InterAct program, where one Friday night for each run, our group that started at like 3 or 4 people is now up to in the 30s, meaning the number, not the age. They're it's under 40, I think, is our definition of young for this group. But what I feel really strongly about is that theater is not on the radar of a lot of people as an activity to do.
Yeah.
If you're not already a theater lover, which is a very small percentage of the population, it's not on your list of things to do this weekend. And so the only way to get on that list is for someone to say, hey, come with us, we're going to see the show, or I saw this show and it was great, you really got to check it out. Once they get in the door and they have a good experience, I think we hook them. Right? If you come and see a good show, you're going to understand how it is palpably different from watching a television show or a movie at home on Netflix or whatever. And I'm saying that at a moment when we're experiencing the golden age of television and film. There is so much at our fingertips that we can watch at any given night, and if we don't like it, we move on to something else really quickly. We can almost always find something pretty good for very little cost. But there is something different about being in the room with community and in the community with the actors and feeling that special presence, that live presence. And if you go to see a good show, you'll be hooked for life, but we got to get you in there in the first place. And that's the hard part. So we're really focusing on incentivizing our existing audiences to tell their friends, not just in a rote kind of way, like, yep, go tell your show. Like we do a post-show speech instead of a pre-show speech, so that we're capturing them after they've seen the show and saying, if you like what you just saw, instead of if you like what you're going to see, if you like what you just saw, bring someone back, tell someone to come back, because that's the way we're going to build this theater, and that's the way we're going to be around to give you more theater in the future. Because if we can't get new people in, our industry is going to be at risk.
Yeah.
And I think that, Caitlin, you're right, that the cost of tickets and the perception of it being an elitist art form are true. But I also know that a lot of people will spend a lot more money on a sporting event or a concert or pair speakers or something else that is way more than a theater ticket.
Oh, yeah.
Because for them, the value of that is higher. We just need to make sure they understand the value of this experience, how different and special it is compared to what they can get sitting in front of their television screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think there's about the middleman of like this balance between the affordability and also the accessibility. When I say accessibility, like being able to see that this is theater is like where it's at, where it's happening. I think for me, it was very important coming into Theater Philadelphia, because before Theater Philadelphia, I was a program director, and I took my kids everywhere. I took my students, and my students' families would tag along after, be like, "Oh, we going with you. What you want to see? Like, we'll go to see it, you know." And Act Two Next Generation is a podcast cohort that we started this year. We're bringing different youth to see different shows. And what we do is, for me, it was like an initiative to put more money into the theaters, but to pour more audiences. Because you got youth now being like, I took my fellows. We have a young artist fellowship with undergrad students who are currently in undergrad or graduating soon, who we went to see Stepmom at InterAct. And they like, so when next show we sing? What's happening? I was like, okay, make it accessible and be the gateway for that. I love that. I think also having opportunities, like I think Philly Theater Week in the past years, while it's lovely having all of these different productions and over 50 productions, I know from my ADHD brain, I was like, that's a lot of, but for my artist brain, it was like, oh, this opportunity. What if we engage with each of these theaters in a podcast? So we're hearing, we're engaging, we're allowing people to, because these days and ages, people just want to know the backstory. They want to know what's happening. Why should I go see this? You know, not just what's it about, why, and why should I invest in this? And I think we are trying to find a way to rebuild theater in Philly. And when I say rebuild, I think Philly theater didn't go away. We were trying to make sure we could survive.
Right. And also when you go to certainly when you turn on your television to watch Netflix, or if you go to a movie in the actual movie theater, you have zero chance of meeting anybody involved in that movie. But when you go to the theater, you stick around after the show, you have a good chance of meeting someone involved in that show. And before the show, you're meeting at least the staff that helped make the show. So there's a real direct human connection that comes out of going to the theater, which you never get from anything that you watch on a screen.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is the reason why theater is still around. It's and has been around forever. Like, it's something that just draws people into a human level that is beyond anything else. Like, and there's not many other art forms that can draw you in that way and make you feel like you're a part of a community. And I think that's why there's still people doing it and will be doing it for forever, for as long as they can. And there's I just think I think it's really a really special community that is happening here. And especially I'm very excited for a lot of the people that I know that are graduating or that have graduated to find their footing here and to really kind of be on the come up, because there's some really, really great innovative friends of mine that I know and that are really excited to get their feet in the door.
And when you something that sparked in my brain when you said about like, this is the history and the importance of theater, right? It's almost like how we value the languages that we want to
full circle.
Right? I was talking recently to someone about like how when I think of also Dr. Kamika Williams Witherspoon at Temple, and how she's always like, poetry is the first form of theater, like, and I'm like, I said, we forget that. We're like, oh, I'm not gonna see a poetry show. What you mean? That's not theater. Or we're like, I'm not gonna see a show that's about this language. What do you mean? And it's like, no, what happens when live theater is no longer a priority for y'all, but for us is our surviving language. It's how we talk. It's how we tell stories. It's how we process. And so there is that fear of it going away. But I always say that as when we are having discussions like this, or when we are doing the work surrounding telling these stories and keep theater alive, we're keeping a language, like a language that passes centuries.
Right. And it's also, the literal language of theater, the text, if it's text-based theater, you could argue exists in other forms, in books and movies and television, and certainly storytelling exists in its greatest point in history through television and film right now. But the language of theater that is different is the sense of being in live and in person with community, and that there is a different experience of that language and a different experience of the response in particular to the theater. You know, when you come to see a show, at least at InterAct, the experience is not complete without the conversation after. Sometimes it's a formal conversation that we organize and have in the theater, but a lot of times it's just people walking off to the bar, to the restaurant, back home, just talking, arguing about what they saw. Most of the time you watch a movie, you do it by yourself, or even if you're with someone, you kind of, that's it. The experience is kind of over. To be in community with people and to feel their presence, experiencing the same live performance that you're experiencing, and then to want to process it together is what makes what we do so special. And it also makes it possible for it to live on, because we don't know if movies, the digital world may collapse one day, but we'll be able to stand in front of each other and perform something or remember something, and that will be theater. Theater will always be in our souls, I think, as a way to communicate culture, and also as a way to promote empathy, because I don't think anything does a better job at getting people to understand another person who's different from you than theater does.
Yeah.
And that's certainly also a goal of ours and a goal with this play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that, definitely. And also just, I feel like it's impossible to leave a show and not want to talk about it afterwards. If it's a good, like, even if it's not a good show, like, it is,
still want to talk about it.
like, it is, I don't think I've ever left a show and have not been like, I got to talk about that, like, for whatever reason it might be. And I think that's something that isn't with many forms, like that isn't the same with television or movies. Like, you can like be like, oh, that was good, great, now I'm moving on, unless if it's something that really captivates you. And there's so many TV shows and movies that do that, but there are also the ones that are just kind of there, but theater is, because it's so in your face and it's so, you are experiencing it viscerally, like your whole body is really experiencing theater to some degree. It's impossible to leave a play, a musical, whatever it might be, and not want to talk about it.
Yeah. And what I do is I thank y'all for being willing to talk about your storytelling today, and the backgrounds of it, and to also have, warm conversations and hard conversations at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, this is what's happening. This is where I'm at it. Right. And this is where I clarify what's going on in my head about this. Right. Thank you to the Theater Philadelphia community who have tuned into this podcast. Thank you to Caitlin. Thank you to Seth. Thank you for all the theater that is being made during Theater Week and after Theater Week. I encourage you to go see The Last Yiddish Speaker, March 29th through April 21st to 2024. You can check on our website, theaterphiladelphia.org, or on InterAct's website as well for ticketing. I think there's still just a couple of pay what you can tickets left through Theater Philadelphia. So grab those up while you can, but still encourage you, because like I said, InterAct has also discounted tickets for young audiences, things like that, and students and teachers and all those things. So look into their website for ticketing discounts and things like that. I think y'all, I'm looking forward to Philly Theater Week and all this like lovely dialogue about language and preservation, and how that also ties into what we do every day, which is make theater and storytell. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.